All right, so let's go ahead and jump into this. I've got my clicker. Just as a couple caveats, I wander around the room. That's how I get my Fitbit score up. So if I stand next to you, sorry, my apologies. Hi, everybody. I'm Keith Casey. I'm here to talk about Batman because I figured what would be better to talk about at the end of the day than Batman. More specifically, I want to talk about building your API utility belt. And some of the conversation or some of the sort of process that came about is I was watching the first Michael Keaton Batman movie. Remember 1990, 1991, and Vicky Vale is in the museum with the Joker. They're having dinner, she's a hostage, and Batman swoops in from the ceiling, crashes through the skylight, grabs Vicky Vale, pulls out this thing, I don't know, hits a button and spears come out of both ends, and he slides out of the room. And what does the Joker say? Come on, some of it. Where do you get those wonderful toys? And I was sitting there thinking, because I have deep thoughts when I watch Batman, I was sitting there thinking, I was like, us as developers, we don't have that same sort of thing. Think of like old school Batman, Adam West. And I would like to point out that Adam West became Batman when he was 38. So some of us in the room still have time. So just wanted to throw that out there. But when Adam West, as Batman of course, hit a scenario, hit a problem, he didn't just say, oh, let me think about it. He had the perfect tool on his belt, didn't he? Somebody earlier was telling me about how there's this, in the Batman movie, he was climbing up this ladder above the ocean, and this shark jumps up and is trying to get him. So what does he pull out? Shark repellent from his utility belt. And as developers, we don't have the same thing. Not shark repellent, we don't have that, but we don't have like the perfect tool for the job. So part of my motivation coming up with this presentation is, let's go and find it. Let's come up with the perfect tool for the job so that no matter where we are in like API usage or development, building, using, consuming, whatever, that we've got the best tool available to us. Everyone got that? So Batman was kind of that was like a Trojan horse, a Trojan bat, and there's actually real content coming, don't worry. A few things you should know about me. First of all, I'm from the great state of Texas. Any other Texans? All right, fantastic. I've learned never ask a man if he's from Texas. If he is, he'll tell you. If he's not, you'll just embarrass him. I got that. All right. All right. Second, I work for a company called Clarify, as you might have guessed from my t-shirt. We're an API that makes audio and video searchable. So if you're doing like conference calls or customer support calls or news broadcasts, whatever, we can go ahead and we can make it searchable. We can tell you who said what when down to the millisecond. Not supposed to pitch that, so if you're interested in that, talk to me after. The third thing is, Buddy and I wrote the best API design book out there, and I can say it's the best because look at that URL, the API design book. Not a API design book, not another, the API design book. And I'm still kind of shocked that that was available as a URL. We've published the first 6 chapters. We have another 4 coming out by the end of the year. All right, enough done talking about myself. So in this talk, we only have about 30 minutes, so we're going to hit some things quickly. First of all, I'm going to start with assumptions. These are assumptions on sort of the constraints and requirements that I was coming from. If you match these assumptions, fantastic. If you don't, tweak the rest of what I say accordingly. Sort of the problems that come into it, the status quo of sort of where we are, and then some of the tools that come as a result of this. So right off the bat, some of the tools I talk about today, I'll talk about my favorite 7 tools. Some of them are from commercial companies, some of them are paid, some of them are open source. I have a vested interest in exactly 0 of them. Use them or don't use them, I don't care. Use something, okay? Make your job easier, make my job as like somebody who consumes your API easier, do the right thing, okay? So I don't care which tools you use, just choose some of them, all right? So this is not a pitch for anything in particular, though I do have my favorites. Oh, and all pictures used here are without permission or attribution, so, oh well. All right, some assumptions. Yeah, I'm kind of high energy if you hadn't figured that out by now, and I wander. Like I said, my Fitbit score has to go up now. Okay, some assumptions. I'm assuming that everyone in the room has a technical background. You use APIs, you might build them. They might be public APIs, like I see somebody from Twilio here. They might be entirely internal APIs. I do some side consulting with banks. They have internal and external. I don't care. Most of these things, most of these tools are going to apply no matter what. The next thing is I assume that nobody in this room is perfect. If you are, why are you here? There's better things you can be doing with your time. If you're perfect and there's nothing to learn, I'd suggest go do something else. Okay, it's good. Thank you for coming. See you later. Okay, so I'm assuming that you sometimes make mistakes. Your providers might make mistakes. As much as we try to say, hey, look, this API we're using is perfect, we're kidding ourselves, right? Things break. And it's not just that your vendors might break. It's that team down the hall where you somehow question why they still have a job. Their stuff breaks sometimes too. And if you are that team down the hall where other people question why you still have your job, that's a whole other problem. We're not addressing that today. All right. So the other thing is I want to make sure that everyone acknowledges the real Batman. It's not any of these guys. It's that guy, okay? I mean, yeah, I mean, he did it when he was 38. I mean, come on, how badass is that? I mean, there's no body shaming here, right? All right. So anyway, first tool we're going to talk about a little bit is curl, or libcurl. A couple of you got the joke. I'm sorry. So this is completely open source. It's embedded in just about every programming language out there. Odds are you've got it on your machine. If you're not using curl on the command line, not a big deal. There are better tools, but this is kind of the base starting point. It's incredibly powerful and incredibly flexible. Just like a knife made out of knives, you're going to cut yourself, okay? You're going to do it. You're going to try to do it well. You're going to make mistakes. It's going to happen. Oh, well, get over it, okay? The one fun thing about this is the manual page for this is for a 4-letter command is 35 pages long. Okay, so this is not something you dive into lightly. There are 4 common commands that people actually care about on a day-to-day basis. -X allows us to specify the HTTP verb. If you're creating your own verb, stop it, okay? I'm not kidding about that. I've had people create their own verb. Stop it. Next up is -D. If we want to go ahead and specify individual fields for like a post or a put or something like that, that works very well. -I, that is a capital I. My font sucks here, but capital I allows us to go ahead and see what headers are returned, sort of see the results of our call. And -H allows us to specify what headers are going along. So if you're doing like authentication, header-based, like that's how you do that. So this is really easy to do. It doesn't take much. We pop this on the command line. If we're in any sort of Linux, Unix, Mac environment, this works pretty well out of the box. We can do a curl to api.github.com, which is kind of the gold standard for good APIs out there. And we can see what comes back. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. -I will tell us the headers. In fact, yeah, let me go ahead and do that. Just a little bit of live coding. We'll see how this goes. And if it goes poorly, remember I worked at Twilio. Let's see. Let me blow this up just a little bit. And yes, that prompt is a monkey. The amazing things you can do with Unicode. So we'll do this. HTTPS api.github.com. And that's what we get back. So we can go ahead and we can hit the API really quickly. We can sort of figure out some information about it very quickly, very easily. If we wanted to, we could go ahead and let me shrink this just a little bit so you see my whole window. If we want, we can add -I, and it'll go ahead, and these are all the headers involved. So it doesn't take much to get started pretty quickly, pretty easily. We can get as wildly advanced as we want with this. Like I said, there's 35 pages to this to the documentation. We can do a lot there. In fact, if we wanted to like create repositories from the command line, we could do that too. We could do curl-u that specifies our username. -X does post, so we can specify what verb to use. The URL that we're posting to. -D allows us to specify parameters. So if we copy and paste this, this would work directly in our command line. We could go ahead and do that. With one caveat. Once again, my font sucks. So these are curly quotes. You'll have to adjust them to the proper quotes. All right? So it's pretty easy to go ahead and get started with curl. Like I said, though, it's a 35-page man doc. It's not something you want to dive into lightly. If you know the top 4 parameters, you're in pretty good shape, though. After that is Postman. Does anyone use Postman? A couple of you got this joke, too. Thank you. Don't humor me, though. This is bad. It gets worse from here. So Postman is a great tool. It's not open source, but there is a free version. And it installs directly as a Chrome plugin. So if you've got like admin access to Chrome, even if you work for an enterprise, you can go ahead and install this pretty quickly. It is an actual venture-backed company. They started about 2 years ago now. They raised a little bit of money earlier this year. 1.5 million users at last count, with about 800K active any given day. So this is a great, like, super active community. In fact, they've got these things called collections, so that if you want to say, well, how do I use this particular API? There's probably somebody out there who's already built a collection that supports all the endpoints, so you suck that in and then you can interact with it and you don't have to figure out the endpoints yourself. It's a quick and easy way to get started on any API. It is free, but there are paid extensions. The common commands, there really aren't any, because it's really as simple as this. So let me go ahead and open up Postman here. So it's sitting loading. So I can go ahead and I can say, you can see my entire history here. Luckily, I was not up to no good, so that's good. So we can go ahead and we do a get to api.github.com, and it's going to go ahead and make a request that says bad credentials, because, let's see, I actually have credentials set here from another project I was working on. Now let's try it again. Okay, so exactly what we had before, it's there. So this is the JSON that came back when we made the normal request. If we want, we can go ahead and we can say, well, this is the pretty view, here's what the raw data looks like, here's what a preview looks like, and here's all the headers. So just like we had before, this is not a huge advancement over curl, except it's much easier to use. It takes a lot less understanding, because if we want to add authentication, there's authorization headers there, we can add all of our headers. It's basically a copy and paste job. Makes it really simple. One nice little touch that I didn't realize that I've been using it for a while is these headers that I'm looking at right now. It automatically alphabetizes them for you. That's kind of nice. Like, that makes it helpful. Like, if you're looking for that particular header, is it there or not? You can glance and have a pretty good idea. Whereas curl doesn't alphabetize them, so you have to sort of hope for the best and hope that you saw it or didn't see it or whatever the case may be. So there really isn't really much documentation on this. There is some, but really, the 90% of it is point and click. It's not, doesn't take a lot to do. Let's see, this is where I do my demo, which I skipped ahead a little bit. This is what it looks like in case my demo's not working. And there's the link to the docs. Okay, next one is behavior-driven development. Behavior-driven development, does anyone do BDD? Exactly half? You do? A little bit. A little bit, okay, so we got a little bit. Behavior-driven development is actually really kind of cool. The first thing it does is it steps us outside the point of view of being a developer. It says, how would a user use this? And the user could be anyone we think. It could be an external developer, it could be a product manager, it could be whatever. It's different than unit testing. Unit testing makes sure that individual functions work. Forget that. This makes sure that the product works as expected. And the way it works is we sketch out basically in English a syntax that looks like this. As a role, I want feature, so that benefit. When we translate this to a syntax called gherkin, as in the little pickle, gherkin, and it says, given condition, when I blank, then blank. So you might say, given I'm an anonymous user, when I submit a valid username and password, I get my status, or I get my profile screen. It's if this, then that. It's very much laid out in that format. And the cool thing is that there's tools in just about every language that support it. So at Clarify, we actually do this for all of our library development and all of our library testing. So I write the PHP library. We've got our Gherkin scripts. It's totally language agnostic. So I wrote the Gherkin scripts because I'm the product owner. Wrote the PHP library to then support that. Our CEO writes the Python library that then makes sure that the Gherkin scripts pass, and our DevOps guy does the Ruby library to do the exact same thing. So this is great. No matter what language you're working in, you've got an option here. And my favorite thing is that it's one set of tests that just work. And it's very clear to say, wait a minute, it's working in these scenarios, but not in these scenarios. Since we know the underlying API works, there's a problem in those scenarios. We need to figure out what to do here. So it's a very clear sort of, is it working or not? And I think the most important part of this is outside from our point of view. So this is saying, what does a user see? Because at the end of the day, that's all that matters, right? Is the user being effective with our API or not? And this is what it looks like in practice. So it just says, given I have an audio file, and there's a URL, and I have an API key, when I post the bundles, then I should get back a status code of 201 created. Developers don't have to write this. We can have product owners write this, and it works out really smoothly. There's some syntax, like keywords we need to use, like we need to make sure that we're using given and when then, but that's pretty easy. That's not a big deal. So we've got a lot of power here very quickly. There's all kinds of docs on this. No matter what language you're working in, there is a tool for it. BHAT is the one for PHP. That's the one I happen to work in the most. But no matter what you're working in, you should be good. In fact, there's one that just launched for Go, I think 2 months ago. I haven't had a chance to play with it yet, but you're covered. Don't worry about it. Next up, we've got Fiddler. Okay, I'm sorry. They're really bad. All right, so Fiddler is built by a company called Telerik. Is anyone a .NET developer? Okay, so you guys might be familiar with Telerik. They do a lot of things in the .NET space, make a lot of libraries. This is built on .NET, but with Mono, you can run it on other systems. So it's not open source, but it's not a commercial project either. So you can go ahead and just download and get set up for free. It serves as a local proxy. So instead of making requests directly to the API, it gives you a local proxy URL, and you make request it, which then replays them out to that API. So it's a little bit different. You might use this in conjunction with Postman or curl, not instead of. It's free to use. There are some paid and free extensions. My favorite one is GeoEdge. GeoEdge is kind of badass. GeoEdge, what you do is you pay for it, but then it plugs into data centers all over the world and checks to see what your API responds to all those. So if you're worried about, well, what will happen when we launch this in whatever country, check. It's really easy to do. It doesn't take much. This is good for tracking like latency and stuff like that. Let's see, one thing to be aware of here. It is considered a man in the middle. Man in the middle, like from a security perspective, is somebody who sits in between you and your destination, collects your credentials, does whatever they want to do, replays your credentials, gets the results, munges them, does whatever it wants to do, and gives you those. Okay? This is a man in the middle. From a security perspective, this is a bad idea. Okay? Because this is capturing your credentials, this is capturing any information going back and forth, all those sorts of things. So I'm not saying don't use this, I'm saying be aware when you use this. Now the benefit though is that all your logs are kept locally. So your logs never leave your machine. So I do some consulting with banks once in a while, and they love this for that reason. Even when they have personally identifiable information going back and forth, they know that the logs are right here. And they know who to nuke if something goes wrong. This is what it looks like. It was obviously designed by a software developer. Yeah, if you can make sense of that, fantastic. But if you stop and think about it though, like JSON, raw, auth, WebView, like all the stuff we had in Postman previously, like the stuff is here. It's not necessarily clear or easy to use, but it's there, it's available. So this is a useful tool. Another screen, this is what it looks like. Lots of places to get this, or lots of places to, plugins to add to this. You can do all kinds of cool stuff with it. Next up is API tools. I love this toolkit. I want one for Christmas. It is actually available on eBay, or on Amazon. So I don't think those are exactly what I thought they were, but hey, it'd be worth the fun. API tools is a system powered by 3Scale, which I admit, API tools is an awful name. If you Google API tools, you might find it. So Google API tools with 3Scale, you're way more likely to find it. This is another proxy. So it works a lot like Fiddler, except this one's in the cloud, which means now all your logs, all your credentials, and everything are being captured in the cloud. So I'm not saying don't use it, I'm saying be aware. So there's the web-based version. That's only good for public APIs. So if you're interacting with Twilio or with SendGrid or something like that, that's fantastic. If you want to use it for something behind your firewall, that's not going to work. So they've got a Debian distribution that you can get on Vagrant or Docker to be able to actually run this within your data center, behind the firewall, whatever the case may be. So if you really like this tool, you can bring it in-house just as easily. And interacting with it, everything you do with it is exactly the same. So just like Fiddler, this acts as a man in the middle. So instead of just making a request directly to your API, this gives you a local URL to interact with. You make the request to the URL, and then it replays them. And then the response comes back, it does whatever, and then passes it back. And And I say does whatever because this offers manipulation and modification. So you can actually wire things and say, hey, look, when this request goes out, make sure to add this header. Make sure to remove this token, to do this, to do that, whatever. You can do that, which actually is kind of cool because now you don't just have to modify it, you can detect things. So if you want to say, hey, look, when I'm running these particular tests against my API, if this field doesn't come back, tell me. This could be a problem. This needs to be something that needs to generate additional action, whatever the case may be. So we can also do traffic and payload analysis, so we can say, hey, what are the response time, what are the latency, all those sorts of things. So we can get a good feel on whether or not the API is working. Like I said, all the logs are kept locally, unless you actually put it in the cloud using API tools itself. And in fact, I can show you how this works. So we've got this is API tools. I'll go ahead and log in here. It doesn't take much to get started. It's literally a copy and paste job. So we say, well, we want to add a service. So we'll say GitHub 2. This is the URL that we'll actually be hitting, api.github.com, and save. Now we're done. So instead of hitting like what I did earlier of curl api.github.com, instead we go to this URL, and now it captures everything between us and between the target URL. So we can go ahead and we can copy this. So it goes ahead, does the same thing. It looks exactly the same. But then on over here, what it's done is it's gone ahead and captured all that information. So now if we're waiting for things like callbacks to detect what's going on, if we're doing anything along those lines, we've got a quick and easy way to say, is this working as I'm expecting it to? And it'll give us a pretty clear yes or no pretty quickly. It really is the 2 steps. I showed what the 2 steps are. So there's docs for this, but really, they're overkill. All right, next up we've got stoplight.io. Yeah, they don't get any better. I'm sorry. Stoplight.io is kind of a unique one in that it was just released last fall. It came out of Techstars Austin, where I'm one of the mentors, and it's kind of cool. It works sort of like Fiddler and sort of like RunScope, which we'll talk about in a minute. Whereas it's a local system, it's a local app that you install, and then it works as a proxy, just like the others. Where it's a little bit different is it can capture everything about the endpoints you're interacting with. So if you've got, let's say you've got that API that's been running in your organization for 10 years, and no one wants to touch it because it works, and the team that built it has moved on and everything like that, you can stick Stoplight in front of it and just run your normal app. Just do all your normal things. And what it'll do is it'll go ahead and capture all the responses that come back. It'll capture the types of variables that go back and forth, like, oh, this is probably an integer because here are the range of values that have gone through it, whatever. And it'll start to build documentation for you. I think that's amazing. Now, it's not perfect. It's not going to come up with every single scenario. Like if your IDs are normally strings, but all it happened to see was integers, it's going to think it's an integer. So it's not super intelligent, but it'll get you a rough draft. This can be web-based. So you can go ahead and you can plug it into their service, which I believe is a paid service, and then synchronize things across. Where it's really useful is documentation. Not just generating it against a working API, but actually building out the documentation itself. Does anyone work in Swagger? Okay, a couple. Swagger is a relatively straightforward JSON structure for describing how an API works. This allows you to build JSON, the Swagger, directly in the interface, and then synchronize it among your team. So if you say, hey, look, here's an API that I'm working with, here's sort of how it works, you can send that to the rest of your team very easily and allow them to start playing with it, start modifying it. If somebody else makes changes, it comes back to you. So it simplifies things quite a bit. It accelerates things. There's a handful of companies starting to use this in production. Dell, an Austin-based company. You guys have heard of Dell, right? They sell computers or something. So Dell's using it for their stuff. SendGrid's starting to use it for theirs. So there's a handful of big companies behind this. It's still very early. Like I said, only started in December 2014. So it's less than a year old. I think it has a lot of potential. Let's see. So I normally would show stoplight right now. I think we're running short on time. I've got 5 minutes. Okay, cool. That's still more than I thought. The docks, ironically, this is used to build docks, and the docks on it suck. So I'm sorry. No, it's they're very embryonic. I met with the lead developer on it 2 weeks ago, and I showed him this slide, and he goes, "Oh, that's right. I need to write docs." I'm like, "Yes, you need to write docs." So they're on their way. I won't say whether that's next week or next month or anything like that, but poke around with it, see what you think. And if it's still in beta only, like beta invite only, when you email or when you submit your information, say, "I heard about this from Keith at AstraCon," and then I'll bug him in a couple weeks and make sure you get on the list. So the last tool I want to talk about is RunScope. Thank you, thank you. So this is actually a periscope that you get from General Mills like in the 60s, and at the time it was like 10 cents to get or something, and now they go on eBay for like $65. Still, that's a great rate of return, but it's still 65 bucks. Like really? Like if you're gonna save something for 50 years, you hope that it has more than $65 worth of value at the end. Anyway, RunScope is a great project. Just in terms of disclosure, when I worked at Twilio, my boss was John Sheehan, who then went on to found RunScope. So I like the tool, I like the team, all that sort of stuff. All the normal caveats apply. This works much like API tools, much like Fiddler, but is exclusively cloud-based. So there's not a way to bring the logs locally or anything like that. So this serves as another proxy. So you generate your URL, and then you put that into your application, and then you interact with that. This is web-based, so it's only going to work for public APIs. There's not a way to bring this behind the firewall to be able to test internal things. But since it is public, there's some cool things you can do around sharing. So I'll actually show that. Let's see, we've got RunScope. Assuming it still works. Maybe the Wi-Fi is down. Oh, no, there you go. Okay, so I'm already logged in here. So we've got the individual requests that come across, all that sort of things. You've got all the same payload analysis that we have with all the other tools. Where things get a little more fun, I can't see it on the screen. Oh, here we go. We've got this little chain link here. So we click this and we say, create share URL. Now, if we copy and paste this URL to anyone, they can look at this. This is great if you're trying to work with like a vendor API and something weird is happening. Go ahead, run it through RunScope, grab that share link, and then give it to them. And say, oh, you want to see it happening? Here you go. And this gives all the details for the request, all the details for the response, and even like connection level information. So if you want to share, hey, look, here's what actually happened, this is a fantastic tool. If you're stuck doing support for your API, which happens occasionally, right? Every now and again, because as much as we want, sometimes our APIs break. This is a great way to put this in front of a customer and say, I understand you're having a problem. Could you do it again using this? So now I can see. So this is a fantastic tool no matter which side you're on. Remember though, this is capturing everything. So your credentials are probably going to end up somewhere in here. So just keep that in mind, okay? Let's see, I lost my mouse. There we go. A couple other cool things about this one is that you can actually wire your unit test into this. So if you're expecting it was on the screen, I didn't show it though, is the concept of a pipeline. So you can say, when I make this request, I'm expecting this here, assert true that this is equal to blah, and you can go ahead and you can do that. And you can do like individual values, like I'm expecting this value to come back, and you can also do a little bit of regular expression to say, I'm expecting a string that's 32 characters to come back. So there's a lot of flexibility there. I especially use this for like callbacks. So like when you make that request and you're expecting some sort of response, this is a quick and easy way to do it. So you can get everything from RunScope, runscope.com/docs, pretty self-explanatory there. So this is how everything sort of fits together. So you must remember, everything here is an active man in the middle, as in it will capture your credentials and replay them. So you must remember that, okay? If you're working in banking, don't just blindly use one of these. Choose the right one for your job, because I'm not going to get in trouble because you made a dumb choice, okay? Just be respectful of that. But from there, we can say, okay, if we want the logs local, Fiddler and Stoplight will do that. API tools is either run scopes in the cloud. Docs generation, Stoplight is the only one that does that at this point. Testing and validation, run scope sort of wins out. So depending on what your needs are, depending on sort of where you are, either internal to the organization or external testing a vendor, there's probably a tool for you. So with that, we walked through all these sorts of things, talked about the right tools, and with that, hopefully you can turn your Batman utility belt from something like this into something that looks badass. So with that, thank you, everybody. Can anyone point out the flaw with this utility belt? It's Batman's belt. What about it? What? You guys suck. There's a gun. Does Batman use guns? God, this conference was great till then. No. Any questions, comments? Yes? Frustration and rage. Wireshark is great. If you want to look at the low level, like what's going across the wire, that's great. Generally though, we don't care about what's going across the wire. We care about like the higher level sort of stuff. We care about, okay, this field went across. I know because I sent this field across. What was the value? So these generally are a lot easier to stand up, to play with, to explore. Most of them are actually supported by teams, so like there's communities around them. So it's all those sorts of things like all combined together. Any other questions? If you like the talk, please let the Astrocon people know. Use the hashtag. My Twitter handle is Casey Software. I'm pretty easy to find online. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. So thank you, everybody.